This is the panel and reading called What's Missing? How Absence Can Drive Narrative. And we're very appreciative for your coming today and spending the next 75 minutes with us. Again, my name is Laurie Doyle and I'll be moderating. And I want to say in particular, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there and to all the sons and daughters who otherwise would be celebrating. So we particularly appreciate your taking the time to participate in this panel. This is a Zoom webinar, as you know. We'll be using both the chat feature and the Q&A, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I'm gonna just say that we're very excited about this topic and we wanna share our thinking and experiences about how a felt absence can be a powerful driver in both fiction and memoir. All four of us are members of the San Francisco Writers Grotto, which is a co-working community of writers with a history stretching back 25 years. 25 years, incredible. This panel came about when some of us were sitting around one day in the lunchroom and we were talking about our work, and we realized that each one of us was writing narratives where one of the main characters was not present in what writers like to call the front story or the present action. And that's what we mean by a felt absence. We realize that this absence can be due to many different reasons, not just the more obvious situation of a death, but also a traumatic accident, a divorce, a lost friendship, someone disappearing and becoming classified as a missing person, someone who's been disappeared by government or other forces, and the list goes on. So it's a bit of a paradox. We'll be talking about something that's not there, but there. I want to say this felt absence doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It can also be a missing object, such as a lost ring, or missing emotion, such as a father's love, or even something extinct, like a lizard. The possibilities are boundless. And as we continued talking that day at the grotto, we realized that a felt absence was not an obstacle to our work, but in fact, a catalyst and a creative spark for our writing. And interestingly, the more that we researched this topic, we found that a significant absence has in fact been a trigger for drama for millennia. And one ancient example is the Odyssey. When it opens, of course, Odysseus is missing. Another one is Moby Dick, where Ahab is searching for the infamous white whale. In James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Stephen remarks that absence is the highest form of presence. So we also see this kind of felt absence in more recent books, such as Marilynne Robinson's Housekeeping, where the girl's mother commits suicide early on, and that sets the story in motion. And also Jesmyn Ward's Sing, Unburied Sing, where Jojo's father is in jail. We realize that this absence plays an important part, not just in literature, but other fields of art, such as Rene Magritte's painting, The Son of Man, where the man's face is missing and replaced by a very delicious looking green apple. And John Cage's 4:33, where the music is missing and we get 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, where in fact we hear the birds chirping, the lights humming in a way we haven't before. I hope this gives you a good sense of the topic we'll be talking about today. And if you know of any other books or works of art that focus on a felt absence, we'd appreciate your noting them on the chat feature. And we'll be checking those as the panel and the reading progresses. Briefly, here are the specific components of our presentation today. Each panelist will discuss 3 major questions on this topic in an open discussion. And each one of us will be weaving in a brief reading to illustrate from their own work to illustrate some key points. And then we'll have a block of readings where each of us will read a second excerpt from our work to illustrate the idea of a felt absence. And finally, we'll end up with a Q&A session Now you can post your questions in Q&A any old time, which is a great feature, I think, of Zoom. So if a question pops up for you, please be sure to note it in the Q&A box, and we'll be wrapping up promptly at 3:15. So you have a bio for each of our panelists on the Weekend of Words website, and we do have a posted handout. Is that right, Lyzette? Did that get posted? I'm thinking it did. But in brief, I want to say Lyzette Wanzer, maybe she can raise her hand, will read a passage from her powerful essay, Jaywalking. Eleanor Vincent will read from her memoir, best-selling memoir, Swimming with Maya. Louise will read a portion of her memoir, which is an Oprah pick, the memoir is called Burned. And again, I'm Laurie Doyle, and I'll be reading excerpts from two of my stories that are in my book, World Gone Missing. So without further ado, let's jump into the first question, which is, talk about what's unseen and unspoken in your work. And remember, panelists, to unmute your microphone when you jump in. Great, go ahead.
So I'll start. This is Eleanor. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Laurie. In Swimming with Maya, we start out with a narrator who is profoundly in shock because she's just learned that her daughter, her 19-year-old daughter, has had a horrible accident and is undergoing brain surgery. So we find this narrator in a hospital in the suburbs outside of San Francisco in Walnut Creek. And we're in the early chapters of the book, the perspective is totally from someone who doesn't really grasp what's happening and is completely in denial. And she's flashing in and out of present time and past time. And then the rest of the narrative kind of deals with how the mother breaks through her denial and begins her journey toward some form of acceptance and healing after this traumatic accident and the death of her daughter.
Great.
I'll go next. Hi, everybody. If my sister's out there, this is your story too. Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Laurie, for moderating. My story is about two parents who were burned in a gas explosion in Cape Cod. It starts with an idyllic scene of getting away to the beach for a month and having this beautiful American dream type vacation. When the accident happens, the parents are taken away, the children don't see them, and then the children are taken to different places, ending up at an aunt and uncle's farm. Originally, I was just going to do the story of the children, but it expanded, which I'm so happy it did, into my parents. And so the children are missing the parents and thinking they might be dead, and the parents in the hospital are missing their children. So the book is interweaving those stories and ending up with everybody coming back together and trying to reconstruct the family. Excuse me, my voice.
Zed, would you like to share?
Yes. The absence in my piece, it's an extended essay, so you'll only be hearing a portion of it today, a couple of excerpts from it. And the absence in my piece is a physical person, my father, but more significantly for the piece, it's the absence of his forgiveness and understanding in a specific area of tutelage that we were raised in, and that I have departed from and no longer follow. And I see in the comments, someone's mentioning Joan Gideon's The Year of Magical Thinking.
Perfect. Thank you and we'd welcome everyone to participate in the chat function and share works that they have found powerful that include a character who's in the wings, so to speak, who's not in the front story. My book is called World Gone Missing, and it's 12 stories that are all based in the San Francisco area. And in fact, missing is the theme of the book. And this didn't really come to me until a writer friend, in fact, pointed it out. And I had about 5 or 6 stories where a key feature of the story was that one of the main characters was not there. It was a felt absence. And in fact, after I realized that, my imagination really caught fire, and I started writing more stories because I realized there are just many ways that people can go missing. And I want to read from the first story, and it's a very brief reading. It's just a page and a half or less, called Bigger Than Life. And this is the first story in the book, and the reason I put it first, people ask me, like, how do you decide the order of stories in a story collection? Well, I very deliberately put this story first because I really wanted to cement the theme of the book. And this is a story, well, you'll see, where someone goes missing and becomes classified as a missing person, and it's called Bigger Than Life, and this is the beginning of the story. The sycamore leaves outside Ben's window were huge, bigger than Jack's and my hands put together. I remember the afternoon light coming off them low and green, reflecting all their veins and hollow places. But the light changed as it traveled across the room. It had to have changed, because when I turned at the sound of Jack's voice, Ben's prescription bottles burned bright orange. His pills are all there, Jack said. The antidepressants, antipsychotics, the antabuse. The room felt hot, the late May hot of San Francisco, and smelled of clothes, gone too long without washing. I watched as Jack thumbed through the pages of Ben's books, haphazardly stacked against the wall. He checked the clothes in the closet, wrinkled button-down shirts and dark pants, a couple of thrift shop tweed jackets, patched at the elbows. Ben's tennis shoes sat near the back. They looked immense, bigger than Jack's and run down at the heels. Jack nudged one with his foot. All Ben's things are here, he said. Only his backpack and wallet are missing. Jack searched the loose papers on his brother's desk for a note. He didn't find one. That I'm sure of. So that's the end of the reading. And I think this story is intriguing because it doesn't really have a traditional narrative arc where we have this rising action and then we have some kind of climax and then we have some falling action. In fact, the whole story is really about falling action, like what happens after a person goes missing. So I'm going to leave it there. Are there any other points that people want to add to this first question about talking about what's unseen or unspoken in your work? Okay, so we'll go on.
Laurie?
Oh, Eleanor, please.
Just only to say thank you for that beautiful reading, because it really sort of spotlights and highlights the anticipation and the narrative drive that gets created when you know that somebody is missing. And as you pointed out in the introduction, there are many different ways people can go missing, and there are many even things that are not people that can be missing that can drive the narrative tension in a story. So I just think that that reading was a great example of what we're discussing.
Well, thank you so much. And that's how my imagination caught fire, is that in fact it's a different kind of narrative arc. We don't have what's classically called the Freytag's triangle. We in fact have something that goes missing, a search, which takes up probably 70 to 80% of a story or a novel, and then finding it. And the main character may or may not find what they're looking for, but there's some kind of discovery. And then and then, of course, the ending. So I really appreciate your saying that, Eleanor.
I just wanted to add that the details were so beautiful with the sneakers, and through the specific details comes the story. So I thought it was beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the second question, which is, how does the felt absence in your story shape the narrative? Well, we've already really started talking about that, but I think there's a lot to say about that. So maybe I'll call on Lyzette and have her jump in, and then, everyone should just add as they're inspired to.
So for me, since I no longer have his presence, in a sense, I feel like I'm forced to create the shape of my father's absence. Realizing that someone or something that is unseen is not necessarily also someone or something that is unspoken, because I feel like he definitely really is still speaking. And also, we did touch on this already, but absence of a person in narrative can make that person more powerful because they're known by a combination of memory and inference. And my memories are going back to childhood, so some of them are probably a little bit less than accurate. So inference does play a role in shaping some of what I think he may have said. I know I have the gist of it. I just may not have the exact verbiage that he used. So in my piece, Jaywalking, which you'll hear an excerpt from shortly, my father is denied a stage presence, but he continues to exert profound influence on how I think and act and believe. And it's actually my first time writing about an absent person like this. So it's a very fraught type of journey and process. And I can't be obsessed about, am I getting it right? Because I'll never know 100% whether or not I've gotten it right, because he's not here anymore. So there's a bit of leap of faith required, sort of stepping out and hoping the net will appear.
I just want to say, I feel like you've just defined the writing process, which is stepping out and hoping the net will appear. So I really appreciate that a lot. And I think that is something that, for me, has really become more and more important as in my journey as a writer, is this sense of faith. So thank you. Other folks?
So I think there are a lot of ways that absence can shape a narrative. To talk specifically about my own work, Swimming with Maya, one of the things that really arose for me was the choices I made regarding the imagery and the metaphors throughout the book. And that was a process of evolution. And as Laurie and Lyzette are saying, one of faith. It took quite a while to get there. But in my book, Swimming with Maya, the image of water is a consistent metaphor that runs throughout the book. And it's kind of a screen through which we see the narrator and this missing character, the daughter, who has now died. And it's a way for us to feel that Maya is still present, although she's kind of hidden in another world, and one that's intermingling with the world of the living. And because Maya was passionate about water, and because there's a scene early in the book, which I'll read from in a little bit, about teaching her to swim as an infant, that became a real thread throughout the narrative. And the memoir actually closes with an image of Maya surfacing and disappearing in a swimming pool in the mother's dream, so that we see that the mother and the daughter are swimming in each other's realities in a new, more fluid relationship. So it's a way of making the missing person more present. It's an evolution that the narrator actually goes through, where she begins to realize the daughter's presence in a deeper way through this metaphor of water.
And I just want to point out and emphasize that Eleanor makes such an excellent point, because imagery is one of your more significant tools when you're dealing with a narrative that involves a felt absence, and that the imagery can evoke perhaps more powerfully than the actual presence of what this person was like, what the relationship was like. And I think Eleanor's book just does a brilliant job, if you don't mind my bragging, of using imagery to bring her daughter and the love that the mother has for the daughter to life. Really powerful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I wanted to add, for all those writers out there, that writing Burn took more years than I would ever even quite say. Over 10. I was a poet first, and so I had to learn everything, literally. How do you write character? How do you do point of view? And when I decided that I was going to do these two stories and interweave them together, how do you create suspense and then make sure there is a seamless transition from these two children, my sister and me, living on a farm, unclear about what was really going on, then suddenly to be in the mind of the mother in the hospital next to the father recovering from burn surgery. So that going back and forth was extremely hard, but in the end, it was the only way to do it, because it is a story about 4 people. And in order to have all those 4 people have voices and be part of it, I had to create suspense. Would the mother survive? That was another thing, to have actual suspense at the end of chapters, to think, oh, maybe I can write a page turner, or try that. So there was a lot that went into it. It was challenging, but it was so exciting to learn all these different techniques.
Lyzette and Eleanor, you are both up for reading during this portion. How do you want to do that? Maybe I'll call on Eleanor to read, and she can say whatever she wants to about her passage, and then Lyzette, you can also follow up with that. That would be great.
Okay, sure. So this is my book, Swimming with Maya. It's a memoir.
It's the most amazing little picture.
Yeah, well, and that's gonna figure prominently here in just a minute. So yeah, that was her at 18 months. And the passage I'm gonna read happened when she was about 10 months old. And to set it up, where we are in the present moment in the forward action is the mother, as I noted, the narrator is in a state of deep denial. She's just learned from the neurosurgeon that Maya's chance of surviving this crushing fall from a horse is about 1%. And this is following the brain surgery. The surgeon has come in to tell this to the mother, and the mother is completely in a state of disbelief. And then she goes into this flashback about the daughter. Up to my waist in aqua water, I propped my 10-month-old baby on my hip, holding her tight to my body. She wiggled and bounced against me as she pointed at the other little ones in water wings, filling the shallow end of the pool. I waded out deeper, away from the hordes of bobbing, jumping toddlers. Her father dived in at the deep end and swam to us underwater, then surfaced inches from Maya and me. He rubbed noses with our baby girl and teasingly whispered, "Peekaboo," and then disappeared under the water again, like a glittering fish. Maya laughed, shaking against me with heartfelt ecstasy. "Where did Daddy go?" I whispered into her ear. Jeff resurfaced and took her tiny body into both hands, then turned her face to mine. Their wet heads bobbed in unison. I backed away and stretched out my arms. "Swim to mommy. 1, 2, 3, go, Jeff said, plunging her underwater. Maya propelled herself toward me, a look of competitive intensity on her face. Bubbles formed as she kicked through the water. Her eyes were wide open with a startled mammalian glossiness. That's a girl. Come on, Maya. She lengthened her torso in one final effort. When I plucked her from the water, she snuggled into my chest, rubbing her fists against her eyes. I prepared to plunge her back underwater and count, knowing her survival in, and she would hold her breath. But I hesitated. What if the instinct didn't work? What if she forgot to hold her breath or struggled to the surface? What a good, brave girl you are, I crooned into her ear and plunged her under the water. Now, all alone in a suburban hospital, I see that young mother as if she were standing next to me. She was intoxicated with her child's will to test every limit, drunk with that little girl's beauty and trust. I pushed my daughter to take risks and applauded her when she did, believing I was encouraging her strength and independence. Until her life hung in the balance, I never considered the darker side of her behavior or the motivation for mine.
What made you particularly pick that passage?
I think because it really illustrates how very early in the book, as I said, this is from chapter 1, I'm laying the groundwork for the theme and the imagery and the metaphor that's going to run through this book. And also because it captures so much about the relationship between this particular mother and her daughter.
Great. Lyzette, we'd love to hear your reading and your thoughts about how it illustrates the idea of a missing driving a narrative.
Okay, so I'm reading an excerpt that is from the beginning of this essay. This is called Jaywalking. Dad was disdainful of homeless people. I was instructed not to give anything to them at any time, under any circumstance. This was an oft-repeated lesson and became an ingrained one. In his eyes, to give a nickel or a nod was akin to a federal offense. They should be working, he'd say, or out looking for work, he'd say. Hadn't we just passed the help wanted sign 2 blocks back? It didn't take a doctorate to haul boxes, now did it? They shouldn't be begging. Where was their dignity? I grew up poor. I grew up hungry, but none of us have ever sought a handout in the streets. Don't give to the homeless. If they speak, don't respond. Don't make eye contact. They're spongers, losers. I nod my head to indicate understanding, though bewildered by both Dad's vitriol and the naked lack in the eyes of the homeless people we passed. I did realize some of them were scammers, and I knew that having a dog or small child could signal a ploy. But the where was their shame question gripped me. By the time I was 13, I couldn't help but wonder that if a person felt ashamed when begging, they were likely not hungry enough. Perhaps any residue of shame had evaporated in tandem with the soaring dignity Dad felt should inform their characters. That shame had vaporized right along with income, homes, opportunity, and hope. Any defense I raised was met with round dismissal. My sympathies, while touching, were misguided. Honest, diligent people wouldn't be on the streets in the first place. They are leeching off those of us who work for a living. They need to get off their idle butts. After college, I made my first foray into independent adulthood, living on my own in New York City. First jobs, first apartments, first bank accounts, first credit cards, first missteps, barbed consequences, first late charges, last chances. By the time I was 25, I was treading the heady waters with aplomb, if not with ease. New York can be a callous place for young people starting out, but it has its benefits. Via an edgy, no-nonsense education that doesn't suffer fools gladly, if at all, the city toughens you. It dispenses knowledge. If you're smart, attentive, resourceful, you graduate cum laude with a diploma in street smarts. This diploma serves you well wherever you venture. You find that it's challenging to traverse any part of the city without encountering the homeless. You grasp that you can be 1-2 paychecks away from being homeless yourself. The city can kick you to the curb in less than a heartbeat.
Thank you. That was really powerful. And it certainly describes the New York I remember. Talk about why you picked that passage and how that missing kind of shows up there.
So he's already present here. He's definitely in my mind, but it's more than that. I mean, I ingrained his teachings. Why wouldn't you? I was sort of a daddy's girl and wanted to be an obedient daughter to him. I definitely got along with him much better than I did with my mother as I was growing up. And so I think when you hear the next excerpt, you'll see a little bit more about how this groundwork that's been set here figures a little bit more prominently later in life.
So I think what you said, Lyzette, is so interesting because there's a way that the missing person also is part of the interior monologue of the character, the main character. Because people that we love and people who form us form our thoughts too, right? I mean, that's so obvious in your essay, but I just think that because interior monologue is such an important feature of fiction and memoir, that the missing element just amplifies, I think, that. And so I just wanted to, accentuate that. And again, thank you for the powerful reading. Before we move on to the next and final question, is there any things the panelists would like to add about this idea of how absence shapes the narrative? I actually do want to. I want to be someone to add something. The last story in my collection is called Voices, and it's about a woman who is a highly successful businesswoman who's lost touch with a high school friend that she was very close with. And it's written in the second person point of view. So there's a you that's repeated over and over again. Do you remember? And I think the missing element is really ideal for the you point of view, or the second person point of view. Because as the challenge is for all of us to make these characters come alive, that shows the bond, I think, between the narrator and this beloved friend that she has lost contact with, and who she's worried about. I won't give any plot spoilers, but it's a way to evoke her presence, and it also can create a haunting effect. The fact that she actually becomes increasingly obsessed. She doesn't know where this friend is. She's written her many letters, and the letters have never come back, but they've never been answered. So there's a mystery there. And I just think this idea of the absent you, even though we never really meet we meet her in the narrator's memories only, is another way to look at missing and how missing can drive narrative.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to just add something, is that in the process of writing memoir, I had to almost pretend I was my father and pretend I was my mother, missing me. So of course, and I'll talk about it more in the next question, I had to do a lot of research and talk to them each and try and figure out what their voices would sound like. And so there's a fictionalized part of it, but part of the challenge of memoir is really making all these different people in your family really characters. So I just wanted to put that out, as what it would feel like for my mother to be missing me. I had to do that, as well as how I felt, which was easier to access in some ways.
Yeah. I think we're always, as writers, trying to put ourselves in the other's shoes as empathetically as we possibly can and as authentically as we possibly can. And it's a tall order, but for me, it has been a really, really powerful one. It's one that has brought me both frustration, great pleasure when I can finally kind of hit it, but it can take a while. So thanks for that comment. That's really helpful. Okay, well, our last question is, what advice do you have? We're hoping that we've enticed you about how this is a really neat way to think about, powerful way, not just neat way, but powerful way to look at literary works of fiction and memoir, to look at narrative, both finished narrative and creating a narrative. So we're hoping that you might be enticed yourself to try this approach out. So our third question really has to do with that, which is, what advice do you have for writers who want to use what's missing to catalyze their own work? And Louise will read during this question. So who would like to jump in?
For me, the best models for understanding what's missing in literature, so to speak, were actually plays. And in dramatic literature, this has been done often. And yes, the stage is a different type of canvas than the page is, but I feel like most of what I've learned about how to manifest absence in narrative comes from watching and reading a lot of different plays.
So I think that you can never go wrong offering writers the advice that they need to read in any discipline, whether it's plays or literature, memoir, fiction, poetry. I read a lot of poetry, and I sometimes write poetry as well. And that has had a profound influence on my writing. So I think my advice, and this is something that poets do very well, is to find ways to make the missing person, if it is a person, present through physical objects. To find physical objects that somehow communicate something about the person, whether it's their habits, their possessions, images that connect to meaningful parts of their characters, or for instance, in Maya's case, her love for swimming and diving and her risk taking, her love of speed. And we see that, as from the excerpt I read, happens very early, even when she was an infant, because her parents encourage this behavior and she really takes to it. Another thing I think that can be helpful in trying to make someone more real to the reader, even though they're absent from the ongoing forward motion of the narrative, is to use themes, as I mentioned earlier. And that is a process that really took me a long time to grasp. And I always like to give credit to Vivian Gornick, to her book, The Situation and the Story, because it was through reading that book that I began to understand, oh, okay, I see. The situation is what happens. It's the plot, if you will. The story is the meaning of what happens, and that's revealed through your underlying themes. And for me, it took a while to get very clear about those themes, and I did have to reverse engineer them and allow the plot and the themes to interweave more, so that to understand what it all means, imagery was one of the best ways to bring forward that underlying meaning.
Great. Thank you.
Eleanor, can you spell Vivian's last name?
Yes, I can. It's Gornick, Gornick. The situation in the story is a short book with lots of powerful examples, including from Gornick's own work. She wrote Fierce Attachments, a memoir about her relationship with her mother. And it was through her own process that she was able to make this distinction between the situation and the story. And I think it's a very important one, particularly for memoirists, because we can get so caught up in the story that we forget, or in the situation rather, that we forget that we have to make the story clearer. We have to continue to clarify the story throughout the narrative.
You know, I think that's true of fiction too. I think that fiction writers, we like to say, well, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And it becomes a string of events, and, you know, and it can become a meaningless string of events until we understand the significance of these events to the characters that are experiencing them. So,
right, and that understanding the significance is a process, which is why when you ask the question, Laurie, what advice would you offer to people who are trying to write a narrative with a component of someone missing or a felt absence, it's so important to really take your time. This stuff doesn't come overnight. Not for me. I had to really work at it and allow the significance of the story to surface in ways that at times were surprising to me. So
okay,
I think
everybody on the panel can relate to it. It takes time. Boy, can I relate to that. Man, yeah. And I think that as Louise said, we kind of have this feeling like, oh, we should just say, yeah, it just was a snap. It's not a snap.
Yeah, I just wanted to, add to the whole thing that it's interesting for many of us that our parents as young people are missing to us. We learn about them through letters or through research or who they are. And I just found I had to go back in my story to my parents' meeting and to them getting married and what that was like for them. So doing research is really important. I also got books. I mean, now it's probably all online, but what did people use for household cleaners in the 1950s? What were they eating? What were the advertisements like? What music were people listening to? My dad was a big reader. So in the hospital, I had to think, well, it was actually Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea won the Pulitzer Prize when he was hospitalized. But one thing that I wanted to mention, which I got.
Can I just jump in for a second, Louise?
Sure.
I just want to say somebody commented in the chat section that it's like historical fiction, and then you started talking about doing research.
Oh, yeah.
To make sure that the period details were authentic. So I think this does apply to historical fiction as well.
Definitely.
In a really strong way.
Definitely.
So
But
people are commenting through chat, and I just want to encourage them.
Oh, yeah. But the one thing I wanted to say that just helped me tremendously and that I use for my teaching is the use of timelines. And I was helped by this through a friend of my sister's who sadly passed away, Martin. So I just want to give a shout out to Martin. But he said that I should take the story, the story of my sister and me, waking up, our parents were gone, and then our journey, living on the farm, all the confusion, us as different characters, and then finally being reunited with our parents. That was one whole story. And then there's a story of my parents being so horribly burned, being in the hospital, finally my dad actually going back to work, and my mother facially disfigured, actually going to work, which was, really took a tremendous amount of courage. But that was a story. So you can get a big piece of butcher paper even and put dates in. I was lucky to find a bunch of research where all my mother's 37 operations were actually listed. And I didn't put them all in because that would have been like, a bit boring to the reader. But picking what things add to your drama. So you can put a year of, what was important to my dad all the way through, my mom, me, my sister, and then it makes it so easy, or easier, I should say, it's never easy, to interweave the stories. And that was one of the, I felt like that made the book into a book, that I learned how to do that.
That's so great, Louise. And I just want to point out that we have the analog version, which is the butcher paper. And then we have, Scrivener, which is a different, and other tools, which are more the digital tools. But, that it's really wonderful to kind of step back and look at the big picture. I think that's great. And I want to invite you now, Louise, to read from your book, from your memoir, Burned, and share a passage and how this illustrates some of the points we've been discussing.
Okay, well, this passage is the first phone call when my parents called at the farm. My mother had it all planned. First, my father would speak with, talk about all her activities. Then my mother would speak with me. Stella had warned them that the children might be scared. Stella was a psychiatrist, that they might not talk much. Not talk? Inwardly, my mother was annoyed at the suggestion. She expected her children would want to talk with them. They were their parents, not Louis and Rusty. My father had the number written on a piece of lined paper that Aunt Peggy had given him. He had gazed at that number almost every day, carrying the crumpled paper back and forth from the hospital to the apartment. His children had turned into this, a flattened line of numbers, remote, detached from him, just like the skin that had been painfully debrided off his burned hands, falling away layer by layer. When the clock struck 5:30, he dialed with his left hand. Uncle Louis answered the phone. Hi, Hank. I hope you're doing better. I've got good news. Louise is finally writing her name. Anne is doing great in school. You should see all her gold stars. And they know how to get the chicken eggs in the morning. I hope the operation went well. I'm going to tell the children you're on the phone. While Uncle Louis was on the phone, Anne was working on her vocabulary words, while I kept writing my name again on a pad, finally putting the E at the end of Louis and not getting laughed at for spelling a boy's name. It had taken me hours of practice, but my uncle and aunt insisted that I be able to write my name. Anne, please come over here, Uncle Louis said. I'm still doing my words, she said. You need to stop because your father wants to speak with you. Anne's eyes, which had just been completely focused on her words for the day, sunshine, door, now flooded with emotion. She grabbed the telephone. Hi, is this my daddy? A pause then. You're not my daddy, she screamed into the phone. My daddy doesn't sound like that. He's never sounded like that. My daddy doesn't cry. My real daddy would come and get me. She dropped the receiver so it dangled for a moment, almost pulling the whole phone off the brown table. She then ran up the stairs to her bedroom and sobbed. I began shaking and covered my ears. I wouldn't take the phone, even when Uncle Louis said my mother wanted to talk to me. Please, Louise, it's your mommy. She wants to say hello. I don't want to, I said quietly, and then felt ashamed. But Anne had said it wasn't Daddy, so I wouldn't talk. My stomach hurt, tears sprang into my eyes. I wanted to crawl into bed and stay still as a tree. Dorothy, Uncle Louis said, Wheezy won't come to the phone. She's upset. Oh, Dot, he said, his voice softening to his only sibling. It'll be better. They're okay, and you'll get better. Bye, Louis, she said, trying not to let him know her voice was cracking and her heart breaking. Louis tried to engage my father in a conversation, but there was silence.
Thank you. That was really great. And I love how you kind of illustrated how you brought the worlds together.
Yeah, that was so challenging. Oh my gosh, really challenging.
Well,
Yeah.
All the effort paid off.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so moving, Louise. I love the father character in your book.
No, thanks.
From the very beginning, I loved him. And your love for him, the narrator's love for him, really comes through the entire book. And in that passage in particular, the clear seeing of the various perspectives, but especially the heartbreak of the father, is so evident. It's very moving.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to move us along, and we're now going to move on to the next to the last section of our session, which is we'll each be reading in a second excerpt from our work, and after that will be Q&A. No questions have been posed, so I have questions for you all, if no one else does, but I want to encourage the audience to either use the chat function or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to pose questions, because we love questions. So each reader will read for just 2 to 3 minutes. And I'm going to ask actually that Eleanor start, since Louise just read. And then we'll go to Louise, myself, and Lyzette. We'll wrap up that portion of the session.
Okay, so again, my book is Swimming with Maya, A Mother's Story. And I'm going to read now from the very end of the book, the epilogue. And I think this section illustrates what I've been talking about, the importance of pulling the threads of the theme all the way through the book. And I'll just read it, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. A few months after Maya died, I had a vivid dream. In it, she is swimming underwater, gliding from end to end of a swimming pool. Smoothly, she rises above the surface of the water, her face ghostly white, her lips blue. She smiles at me. I feel happy to see her. I start to move toward her, yet something in her manner tells me I cannot touch her body. Her face glows with innocence and pride. She looks surprised and pleased to be alive. Then she vanishes under the calm surface of the water. She tries to tell me something important in the dream, something she wants me to understand. But each time I approach comprehension, a terrible static drowns out her words. I think her message is about moving between the worlds of what we call life and death. Maya is showing me how good she is at operating in this alternate reality. A metaphysical diver, every bit as graceful as she had always been. My role is to stand aside and watch. I struggle to let Maya go, to be the observer of her new life in another element, as I did all those years ago when her father and I plunged her under the water to teach her to swim. Maya swims eternally back and forth in me. Although she was my child, now she seems to have become my elder, far wiser in the ways of life and death than I am. She moves between the anchors of her lost life on earth in an element so fluid, so encompassing, so diaphanous, I cannot see it with earthly eyes. But in my soul, I know it is so. And as she moves, I move back and forth between life and afterlife in my dreams, swimming with Maya.
Thank you. Louise.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that makes me cry.
I know.
Here.
Very moving.
Okay, this is when my dad came to pick us up after 9 months gone. When Uncle Lewis opened the door to the white farmhouse, there were two forces at work. One was the chill wind that rushed in from outside, and the other was my father, returning for his two daughters after nearly 9 horrifying months. He was changed in the way that people are changed when they come back from war, or lose a child, or lose their minds. He was changed well beyond the mottled, shiny skin of yellow, brown, and ivory, or the half burned off eyebrows that would have expressed constant surprise if it hadn't been for the sorrow that sucked away his soul. After the door was closed behind him, my father, his shoulders stooped, his head down, his black gloved hand still in his pocket, stared at Anne and me, his daughters, who appeared so cozy and settled in this new family. He took a deep breath and a few tentative steps towards his girls. For a minute, the room was unbelievably silent, even though 7 people inhabited the small space. Wheezy, Annie, he said, his voice rising up out of a drowning place, trying so hard to rise to the surface. Wheezy, Annie, how you've grown. Hi, Daddy, Anne said, moving toward him first. Where's Mommy? You'll see her tomorrow, he said, his voice breaking. She's at home.
Oh, very beautiful. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions. No, we have one question in the Q&A list. It's from Melanie. Thank you, Melanie, for sending in a question. We can handle a couple more. I'm going to read next from a rather short story called Lilacs and Formaldehyde, and it's a mother-daughter story, so I thought it would be appropriate for today. It's a unique mother-daughter story. Late at night, I heard my mother cleaning, the roar of the Hoover, the sound of chairs scraping across the floor. Smells of lemon pledge and sudsy ammonia wafted into our bedroom. Zach, I said, do you hear something? Not really, my boyfriend grunted. Well, maybe. What is happening? Beats me. He rolled over and fell back to sleep. My mother died 6 months ago. She had had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high everything, doctor's appointments all the time. Last January, she beat back double pneumonia and was her old self again, calling me 2-3 times a day, wanting me to come over and fix the TV, check the checkbook, dust. The last time she phoned, she asked me where the kaopectate was. I told her in a not very patient voice. Then, feeling guilty, I offered to bring over chicken soup. She was my mother, after all, and I, her only daughter, my father long gone. She pulled in a raspy breath. It's nothing, she'd said, not sounding very happy either. I'm fine, really. That night, my mother died in her sleep. Quickly, the doctor said. Now, here she was furiously cleaning my apartment. I heard her humming Stormy Weather and talking to the furniture the way she always used to whenever she rearranged it. Not bad, she said. Then, old friend? I didn't want to go see. Maybe her face was decayed and half crumpled in. Maybe she was just a bodiless voice, a vacuum cleaner running through air. Or maybe she looked the way I remembered her as a child, just 5'3", but huge to me, with a long pale neck and eyes that went from brown to green in bright sun. In life, cleaning had not been her thing. Rearranging furniture, yes, but never cleaning. She'd sponge the kitchen counter in big, fast circles, leaving a thick rim of crumbs. Before Zach and I moved her into the senior facility, I had to scrub out congealed blood from the refrigerator meat compartment. Now I heard my mother washing dishes with a vengeance at 3 a.m. Something crashed, then something else. Before I knew it, I was out of bed in my pajamas and bare feet, heading into the kitchen. She had pulled out the garbage can and was standing next to it, holding up a blue onion plate to the light. Soapy water dripped down her Playtex gloved fingers. That's my plate, I said. She smelled like lilacs, her favorite scent, and formaldehyde. Well, I was the one who gave it to you. My mother flung it in the trash. What are you doing? I said. It's cracked. You should not be eating off cracked plates. She looked at me long and hard. Her hair was back to its original dark red. 2 flush spots of mauve stood out on her blue-white cheeks. She wasn't wearing the black pantsuit we had buried her in, but turquoise slacks and a bright gold sweater still covered with Esmeralda's cat hairs. My mother dragged on her Pall Mall until it glowed. Apparently, she had decided in death she could start smoking again. The long ash tipped, but didn't fall. And I'll stop there. Okay, Lyzette.
Right. So I'm reading now an excerpt that's a little bit further along in the piece. I began to feel differently about the displaced. People, not objects, not snakes, not lower than animals, not even necessarily lower than myself. Despite my early tuition, I couldn't blur past the homeless like they were squashed cigarette butts. I came to appreciate that some of them had been in my shoes just a few months or weeks ago. And though deceased, Dad prevented me from giving. His ire's echo partitioned me from merciful acts. Clouds of guilt and reproach curtained me off from upturned palms. Manufacturers Hanover changed the pattern. New York's Avenue of the Americas, not far from 42nd Street, was the backdrop. When I entered the ATM vestibule, I found a 3-person line waiting for one of the 2 machines. An older gentleman in a mangy tan suit, his pants semi-buckled, wearing a stained, outdated jacket, 2 sizes too big, small thread coils swaying from the hem, asked each person joining the queue whether they could spare any change. He didn't say he was homeless, and I don't know that he was, but what was evident was that he had been snared in some wretched ordeal. His ripe gray hair fanned out in all directions. His teeth were sallow, askew, featuring nodular banks of vacant gums. 2 sooty palms harbored a worn cup. His dark eyes, dewy and jaundiced, blinked slowly as he appealed to our profiles. We were oblivious to him, to the clamoring avenue outside the glass. We adopted perpendicular stances, the learned stance of ATM dawdling. Eyes for the machine only, ears primed for the all-hail triple beep, signaling the end of a transaction. When that customer left, our line would crease forward like an accordion. As I left the machine and headed toward the exit, my hand slipped into my denim pocket and pulled out a fistful of change. In one smooth motion, I transferred the coins from my right hand to my left and dropped it into the man's cup as I passed. He murmured several thank yous and patted me twice on my shoulder. Ignoring both the pats and his thanks, and without breaking stride, I booked it out of the bank. On the sidewalk, I affected a nonchalant gait as I headed uptown. I was painfully conscious of my betrayal. My face burned, my throat closed, and my shoulders hunched forward, skimming the mutiny off my body. I had done it, committed high treason, and disrespected both my father's orders and his memory. What I had done amounted to a Class B felony. I came away from the donation feeling diminished, not charitable, scourged, not merciful. Thank you. Laurie, you're on mute.
Thank you. I didn't think I had that right. Thank you very much. I just want to say again, Lyzette, thank you so much. And thanks to all the panelists for these beautiful works that you have shared with everyone. We do have one question that's been posed. I want to encourage folks out there to ask questions. Melanie asked us a great question. Where absence is concerned and the character's reaction to it, do you find your characters need to have the goal of filling that absence? That's the first part of the question. Do the characters need to have the goal of filling that absence? The second part of the question is, how does that manifest? So we've been talking a lot about how that manifests, but we can certainly say more. But the first part of the question is very fascinating. So do the characters actually need to search for the missing person? What do you guys think?
I'll start quickly, and then see Eleanor wants to. I think it's very interesting with children, because children live in the present so much that the fact that our parents were not physically present for 9 months gave us a long opportunity, and I'm talking for my sister who's here too, a long opportunity to connect and attach to our aunt and uncle and to this life on the farm. And that was actually quite healthy, but it meant that our parents in many ways became further and more absent. And it was hard to, it was some ways hard to remember them. There weren't pictures. So I think it depends partly on the age and the situation.
Okay, so I want to just do a 7-minute time check. And again, thanks, Melanie, for your question. I'm sure we can get to it. We have a second question too.
There are also questions in the chat, just
okay.
FYI.
Okay, thanks. I want to say that I think I want to come down on the side that the characters should search for the missing person, but because remember we're told that our characters have to want something, both in fiction and memoir, and that's certainly a way to show their desire, their longing. But the other thing is, perhaps they aren't. I mean, the thing that's sort of interesting about it is they don't necessarily have to search deliberately, but search more peripherally. And I'm thinking here about an adoptee who would always their kind of radar out about, wow, is this person my birth mother or my birth father? Gee, those hands look kind of like my hands. So it doesn't have to be this ardent search. It can be more of a consciousness, it's always filling my consciousness. Who is this person? Yeah, let's just take a couple, because if we don't get to all the questions, we will definitely respond to them, and Tess will help us with that. But Eleanor, did you want to jump in, or Lyzette?
I think I just wanted to say that I also come down on the side of, yes, the narrator or the main character should be engaged in a search, but that search could probably be a meandering one, and if it's handled skillfully, it would still drive a lot of narrative tension, because our lives don't always go in a linear fashion. So just because someone is searching, it actually doesn't mean they find what they're looking for. For instance,
that's very important point.
The narrator in Swimming with Maya is in some ways trying desperately to bring her daughter back to life. And we have to follow her journey in the forward action in the book, which takes 6 years before she finally gets to a point where she's willing to understand that she's never going to find her daughter. Her daughter is not coming back. And so she has to accept the daughter's presence in a new form. And that's one reason I chose that last passage to read, to show that the narrator does get to that point. I wouldn't call it acceptance. It's more of an acknowledgement that there is a new relationship that has occurred. And so, yes, I think searching needs to take place, but it doesn't always need to end up with finding.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in because part of the search in my book is for my mother's face as it was before she was burned. And by the end of the book, it's clear that face is never going to come back. And everybody has to accept that.
Wow. So that's so interesting that it's a significant part of the character, not necessarily the character.
Yeah.
Herself. We have we do have a second question, which I think is fascinating, from Afshan, excuse me if I'm not saying your name correctly, Afshan. Would you say absence is inextricably linked to loss? If not, please provide an email sample where it is not. Well, I want to jump in and just say several of my characters feel liberated by the fact the person isn't there, because in the case of a divorce, for example, they may feel, wow, now I get to be the person that I more truly am, that I'm not always in the presence of this individual. So yes, it can lead to loss and often, missing, does lead to loss, but it also can lead to a sense of liberation or freedom or discovery. I mean, I would just add to what Eleanor said, is that something has to be discovered, not necessarily the person, because maybe, for example, in my story, Bigger Than Life, the person does not show up, but something else significant does. And again, I don't want to have any plot spoilers, but Lyzette, you're looking like you want to say something, so I want to invite you in.
I also wanted to say that absence can also lead to a sense of relief, a sense of unburdening, and a chance for rediscovery, and even reinvention. So even though it may still be a loss, it doesn't have to be a loss connected with grief or a loss connected with sadness.
Yes, and your essay is an excellent example, actually, of that the world got bigger. You know, I mean, thank you so much for that. Well, we are at, well, we have one more minute.
We have 2 minutes.
Wow, 2 minutes. Okay. Let's see. Are there any other, I mean, how does it manifest was also part of Melanie's questions. I think we've been talking about that. It can manifest in an ardent search. It can manifest in a more pervasive kind of consciousness. It can manifest in letters. We haven't even talked about the epistolary kind of, if I'm saying that right, opportunities that a missing character brings to a narrative. I just think this is a powerful generator of writing that I want to encourage you all to just try, if only in a 10-minute free write, which is, who's missing in my story.
1 minute.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take this opportunity first to thank Eleanor, Louise, and Lyzette, and Tess, our technological maven, and Shuffle Collective for making this fantastic opportunity available to us.